Hi, everyone. I hope you're well. Rabbi Starr here. Um, so this in this week's parsha, we read about the Eser Makot, the 10 plagues. We don't get through all of them, but almost all of them. And obviously, there's a tremendous amount to say about them. Their order, the rhythm of them. Of course, one of the most insightful, important understandings is that they're a kind of an undoing and inversion of creation. And the taxonomy, the order of creation is undone, um, which in some ways is a kind of a statement of um, God suggesting that um, he can create order and he can also create chaos. There's a way in which, of course, probably the most powerful thing in there that we sometimes miss because we're focused on the extent to which it's really a story about justice in two ways, one of which is the punishment of the Egyptians for being enslavers, and secondly, the liberation of the Israelites, the enslaved. But I think the thing that is oftentimes a little bit less missed, but which I think is significant too, is that through this whole drama, God is in effect trying to insert himself into the drama, the story of human life, the story of life on this planet. The idea that says, as powerful as ideas are, like dignity, justice, freedom, equality, fairness, those are things that we are oftentimes tempted to think we can possess without God. These are just human matters for us here on earth while we're alive. But the Torah is saying something that's in some ways much more radical and maybe hard for us to grasp, which is that there are two goals here, one of which is human freedom, but that should not be understood as freedom from God. That this notion of freedom, equality, all of these very powerful values and virtues that we work for are not antithetical to God's presence, but in fact, in many ways depend upon them. And that's a much more complex, interesting working through of a certain kind of view of humans that says without God, maybe we'll end up enslaving each other. We'll be cruel to each other. We'll be selfish vis-a-vis one another. We'll think in purely transactional ways. We won't be able to overcome our baser instincts. And so that God is the one that is ultimately providing our values and our commitments to higher goods. So that's all really on the table in some ways in this story. Um, and one small way of understanding this is the fact that I think the plague story and the Haggadah, of course, which will in effect reprise this drama from the book of Exodus, um, the the plague story really combines these two aspects, one of which are the joys of justice. Um, Again, both in the negative sense, the punishment of the Egyptians, in the positive sense, the liberation of the Israelites. So on the one hand, it's very much a story about joy and justice. On the other hand, it's also a story about revenge and the problematic nature of revenge. So I want to read to you very quickly two pieces from the modern world, the last couple of hundred years, that will put this in perspective for us. One of which, of course, is certainly the second, or maybe the greatest American president of all time, Abraham Lincoln, who is the one who guided us through our only civil conflict that broke out into bloodshed, the Civil War, the American Civil War in the 1860s. And in his second inaugural address in 1865, just a few months before he was assassinated, President Lincoln said, if every drop of blood drawn by the lash, right, by the slaver, must be paid by one drawn by the sword. Still, in other words, the only way really to end slavery is by violence, is by a just war. Still, must it be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether, right? A kind of a very beautiful, tragic view that says, as terrible as war is, sometimes it is for a just cause. Lincoln believed that, and Lincoln lived through that, and Lincoln led us through that. The idea that says sometimes we have to suffer for a higher good, in that case, human justice and equality and liberation. Of course, President Roosevelt in the Second World War would have said the same thing about the defeat of the Nazis in particular and fascism in the world. So that's on the one hand, it's a kind of a joyous statement about justice and the irony that you get justice through violence, terrible acts of violence. And then on the other hand, I think a classical Jewish sounding of how really deeply sad it is um, to take up arms even in a just cause, and what it means to rejoice in um, liberation, but not to rejoice in the downfall of one's foes or the suffering of one's foes. And here I'll just quote very quickly from Yitzhak Rabin, may he rest in peace, who at the time of the Six-Day War in 1967 was the chief of staff of the Israeli army. And he said this after, I think in the immediate aftermath of the war. He said, "War is harsh and cruel, filled with blood and tears, while the joy of victory seized the whole people, the whole Israeli state. Among the community of fighters themselves, there is a strange phenomenon. They cannot celebrate wholeheartedly." And of course, that's the note that the Haggadah sounds as well. You do not celebrate. You celebrate victory, you do not celebrate the downfall, suffering of one's foes. There's a large measure of sadness, of shock, mixed into their festivities. Some fighters, and of course, he's really talking about kids here, right? The young boys, really, 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are serving in the Israeli army, and they're doing that today too in Gaza. Some fighters can't celebrate at all. The frontline soldiers saw with their own eyes not only the glory of victory, but also its price. Their fellow fighters fell at their sides in pools of blood. I know that the price paid by the enemy also touched a deep place in the hearts of many. Perhaps the Jewish people has never become educated, has never been educated, never become accustomed to the joy of the conqueror. Therefore, our victory is received with mixed feelings. So I think that's a wonderful way to end. In other words, the plagues are pushing us towards a sense of the power of God's presence, the importance of fighting for justice, even by means of violence, but not to become a joyous conqueror. Victory, yes. Justice, yes. The joy of conquering, no. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. God bless.